Welcome to Strange and Mysterious World. It's the Halloween edition. We have our friendly Satanist Tristan back, and of course William.
Sorry, I forgot my mask, Lee. I wish I had
Fuck
displayed
you,
it.
William. Fuck you. All right. Okay.
Are you gonna talk the whole?
Tristan. No, I can't talk like a Jesus. I'm busy boiling my balls off in here currently as it is. But okay, so Tristan, what we wanted to chat to do today was obviously being Halloween tonight, we were keen to talk about Halloween and the origins and kind of what it's all about.
So first of all, guys, thank you so much for having me again and for also dedicating so much effort and time towards making this work. It's I'm really grateful for you guys and indulging my conversation for a second time.
Cool.
So about me, for the listeners who don't know me, I am the Friendly Satanist, also known as Tristan Kapp, alternatively is my real name. The Friendly Satanist is merely just a nom de guerre, or a rather pseudonym under which I operated since I think it was 2022. But yeah, so that's my social media handle and my social media brand per se. But other than that, I have a background in theology. I have a Bachelor of Divinity in theology as well as a Master of Divinity in theology, mainly focusing in the areas of systematic and historical theology. So the history of Christianity and the history of ethics in Christianity was merely my background. So I basically studied to become a dominee, as the Afrikaans people would know it.
A
And
priest.
then, yeah, basically, yeah, but more the Afrikaans version in the NG Kerk, the Dutch Reformed Church type version. But then, shit happened, and I fell in love with academia, and so I eventually did my PhD in religion studies, which I've now finalized the thesis, and I'm just waiting for the due course procedures, so I can then eventually graduate. But until then, I can still not call myself doctor yet. But anyway, so yeah, and I did my PhD thesis in religion studies in the same department where I'm also a research associate at the University of Pretoria, where I frequently, or rather specialize in alternative religions, new religious movements in South Africa, as well as esotericism, which means basically religions to do with self-knowledge and non-traditional spiritual forms of religion, essentially. So yeah, and then I am also the spokesperson and interfaith officer for the South African Pagan Rights Alliance, which is a non-profit organization that basically advocates and protects the religious rights of minority individuals in South Africa, such as pagans and alternative religions, the Celts, and the whole shebang. And I am basically the Satanist of the bunch. So we're quite a diverse bunch, but I've basically utilized the platform to advocate and to basically spearhead my passion for alternative belief systems in South Africa, and also use it as a platform to voice these individuals and their concerns, and also protect them from discrimination in all areas of life. So there's that. And I've also recently joined the organization Recovering from Religion in the United States, where it's basically I'm in the process of becoming a support group coordinator in trying to help people in their journeys recovering from, I'd say, religious trauma, as well as trying to navigate their difficult questions of religion and about religion. So it's not just about deconversion. It's basically to create a safe space for individuals who are questioning or whether to understand religion a bit more. So I'm trying to establish that in South Africa, so as to open the discussion towards alternative belief systems a bit more, and also normalize the aspect of questioning certain belief systems, and also even practicing your traditional religion in a non-traditional way, if that is what people so choose. It's merely to just facilitate a community, which is something I'm very passionate about. Then I've got my own counseling practice, where I basically help people with trauma through a wide variety of experiences in their lives, especially with regards to my main focus being marginalized individuals. My practice is called alterity counseling, which comes from the Latin alter, which means different or non-traditional, essentially, if you want to translate it non-literally. So basically to encourage individuals who are usually ostracized or don't feel comfortable in traditional, I'd say even pastoral counseling or even normative psychological counseling environments, to have an intro into mental health support on a very, very basic level. I'm not a psychologist. I cannot diagnose, I cannot provide therapy, but what I can do is I can aid in some small way individuals or navigate individuals to explore their identities of otherness through a variety of ways. For example, especially focusing on my passion as being an ally for the LGBTQ community, creating a safe space for them in navigating their own sexualities, in addition to individuals suffering from sexual or religious trauma, which is also something I'm very passionate about, in addition to individuals belonging to, for example, the trans community, who have the desire to affirm their transition journey and their identity and reaffirming their identity through that. So basically trying to get all of the people who are different, the individuals who are ostracized from normative communities and who can't really feel comfortable with certain approaches because of the fact that they're afraid of whether their identities will be affirmed or not. And so and that's basically what I do, and what I aim to do is basically, I don't care who you are or what you identify as. If you need a safe space, if you need assistance through mental health in that aspect, I would like to be that person, to not through any promotion of religious or non-religious methods try to encourage you to open up and get the support you need that you can't get from traditional instances, as well as in an affordable manner, because mental health is quite expensive in South Africa today. So these are some of the things that I'm working on.
Sorry, I keep laughing, but you're talking about all the serious stuff, and I'm looking at fucking Lee with this mask on. And I just can't stop laughing. I can't stop laughing. You're going on about all the serious, like, hectic things, LGBTQ and like mental health and everything. And you're trying to help these people.
This is amazing.
And you're fucking leaving with this mask, and I just can't stop laughing. So sorry. For watching this, and they think I'm not laughing. I'm not laughing at what Tristan's saying. I'm laughing at
No. I get you. I get you.
So, Tristan, you're going to be known shortly as Doc Satanist.
Well, yeah. Well, the idea behind it, if and when I graduate with my PhD, I was thinking of, being a bit tongue-in-cheek about it, and basically Dr. Satan would be funny, purely for just for laughs. In anything more than that, due to the fact that I don't think people are used to those things used in conjunction, both in a tongue-in-cheek way as well as in a credible way. So, I mean, you've got Doctor Strange of Marvel, so why not the Dr. Satan? It would be funny. One of my fans told me that if I ever decide to do a live stream again sometime on my own platforms, if I allow someone into the stream, I can say, Dr. Satan will see you now. So yeah, but that's just for laughs, and yeah. But I mean, here's hoping that I can publish my thesis and the information therein as soon as possible, because I'm quite excited to share my research freely available, because that's also something I'm passionate about, is sharing knowledge and making it accessible digitally, for free, because of the fact that, it's very hard as well in today's society to have access to reliable and credible information in today's society, but also to open up the discussion and have people have the ability to access the information and make up their own minds about it and critique it as much as they want. so as to open up the discourse and say that, you know what, these academic conversations are not only for academic contexts and ivory towers alone. I want to, you know, democratize knowledge per se and put it in the hands of the people.
Amen. So on that note, what's Halloween about? What is Halloween? What's the back?
Well, so that's a fascinating can of worms. Basically, what a lot of people don't know is that Halloween, in and of itself, in terms of the nomenclature of the term Halloween, comes from the Catholic Church, which derives from All Hallows Eve, or rather All Saints Eve, which was a day in the Catholic liturgical calendar reserved for the veneration of departed saints. So for those who are Catholic might remember or know that in the Catholic tradition, you have certain saints or certain individuals who made significant contributions to the Catholic Church and also did a lot of, in the Catholic Church's eyes, though, contributions to, the Christian faith, either through martyrdom or through miracles or stigmata. There's a wide variety of things that could happen and to have you established as a saint. But that includes also the apostles or individuals who were prominent biblical figures who are also classified as saints. But aside from the biblical figures, two individuals who are quite notable and quite famous within the Catholic theology is Saint Francis of Assisi or Saint Augustine, who were two of the most prominent theologians within the Catholic tradition, who would, for example, be revered and remembered on the day of All Hallows Eve. And essentially, in the Catholic Church's calendar, this was celebrated on the 31st of October, or I don't know if it's still celebrated anymore. I'm not too well versed on Catholic liturgy at all, but I'm open to correction. So as I understand it, aside from All Hallows Eve being celebrated on the 31st of October, there's also the All Souls Day that is celebrated on the 1st of November, which basically is a day allocated for the veneration of all Christian souls. So where it essentially came from, the entire tradition, the entire history behind it can actually be traced back to ancient paganism. So back to the Irish Celts in the Dark Ages who practiced Samhain, which was a harvest festival celebrating the changing of the seasons. Obviously, you've got several iterations of the festival in the pagan calendar, in the lunar calendar. Is in the southern hemisphere, it's called Samhain, and in the northern hemisphere, it's called Beltane. So Samhain in Irish Gaelic translates basically to summer's end, whereas Beltane translates to big fire or large fire, which is quite characteristic of the celebrations of the transition between the seasons. Essentially, in the Celtic calendar, the Samhain celebrates the transition from summer to winter. And essentially, it is a period starting from dusk to dawn, the next day, to basically venerate the souls of the departed, but also essentially to take a piece or to take certain parts of your own, I'd say, like the farmers. It was celebrated in agricultural communities, and so you would get individuals who would take their grain or their cattle, and they would sacrifice it for the harvest gods, in order so that the gods would protect them and their cattle and their, stuff for the upcoming winter, and also keep their families well fed and protected throughout the winter, because of the fact that winter was a trying time for agricultural communities in the Dark Ages, due to the fact that the environment played a large role in actually facilitating whether the next harvest would be successful and how much success has been made from the previous harvest. So they would take the grain and everything and put it in stores so that the winter would not, or so that they could have food throughout the winter. So aside from that, especially during that time, the ancient Celts also believed that during the period of Samhain, the the veil between the living and the dead was at its thinnest. So similar to what we see today with the Dia de los Muertos, celebrated in a lot of Latin American and South American contexts, where there is a celebration and a veneration of the dead, where individuals and families would go to burial mounds or to gravestones and leave offerings for the dearly departed, which would also then, in the Samhain tradition, come from the harvest and the results of the season's harvest that they would take to the burial mounds. So essentially, just like with the Dia de los Muertos in the South American or Latin American cultures, it is a day revered for remembering family members who are not there anymore. And so it essentially, in the ancient tradition of the Celts, it was therefore marked by extreme festivities, a lot of drinking, festivities, eating, partying, music, big bonfires, because of the fact that the bonfires also had a sort of dualistic meaning, in the sense of that it had a symbolic meaning, as well as the fact that it also believed, they also believed that it was a way to keep certain bad spirits away. So essentially that was where the bonfires were allocated for. And essentially what would also happen is that during this time, a lot of the families would go to the burial mounds, where they would visit the Aus Sheed. I'm not too well versed in Gaelic, so my pronunciation might be off. But this is the Gaelic word for referring to spirits or fairies, or even, people of the mounds, who refer to the spirits of the dearly departed, who then would receive the offerings. And that is where the festivities and the parties by these family members would then be held, apart from the communal festivities. So, and then again, characterized by the festivities was also divination practices, such as featuring acorns and apples, if I'm not mistaken, or hazelnuts, which were essentially a symbol for wisdom, and the apples, which were strongly associated with otherworldly immortality in ancient Celtic paganism. So all of these incorporations and all of these festivities were surrounding and celebrating the lives and the memories of the dearly departed during the festival period. And essentially that is where the basic thing of All Hallows Eve comes from the ancient pagan tradition. So the festivities would then be celebrated from the 31st of October to the 1st of November, the same as today. And the only difference is that, again, mumming and guising was also a big part of the festivities, where they would, for example, dress like the Marie-Louise, if I'm not pronouncing it incorrectly there, which is basically either representing a deity or a sort of luck bringer in the ancient Celtic tradition, where this Marie-Louise would then go from door to door to families and sing verses or recite verses and sing songs in exchange for certain gifts, such as food or offerings. And in exchange for these verses and stuff, the families who would give the offerings or the gifts would then see it as a bestowment of good luck for the families, a sign of goodwill in the sense of that you would give a sort of treats to the individual portraying as the Marie-Louise. And I also forgot to mention that during this time, in addition to the Marie-Louise, the mumming and guising, the souls of the dearly departed were also seeking hospitality at their relevant houses, and therefore it was also necessary to keep at bay and ensure protection from certain bad spirits in accordance with the ancient traditional practices. So yeah, essentially that's where the mumming and guising were coming from. And so eventually the Romans conquered the Celts around 43 Common Era, and they ruled there until 410 Common Era, if I'm not mistaken. So essentially during that time, there was a huge transition where the Romans essentially forced the transition, or I'd say facilitated the transition from paganism to Christianity as such, because of the fact that the pagan word comes from the Latin paganus, which refers to essentially individuals, agricultural individuals living in slums outside of the Roman society. So they were basically not regarded to a certain degree as on the same level, socially speaking, as the Roman citizen. So essentially, the pagan essentially was a Latinization of the word heathen, which is the Norse word for, I think, believer or similar things. Again, I'm not an expert on linguistics, so I might speak under correction with regard to some of the terminologies. But in any sense, so the transition basically happened. And so the All Saints' Day, or the Samhain, was then repurposed in the Catholic calendar, because we know that Catholicism comes from the Roman Catholic Church, or the Romans essentially, who popularized Catholicism historically and essentially then appropriated the ancient pagan religious traditions, especially similar to Christianity, similar to Christmas and Easter, which are all pagan-born holidays. Christmas being Yule in the northern hemisphere, as well as Easter being Eostre, if I'm not mistaken. So essentially, then again, Valentine's Day, similarly too, which was also a Catholic institution or Catholic sanctioned holiday, celebrating Saint Valentine, which then was used to supplicate Lupercalia. So all of these holidays in the Christian liturgical calendar today have their roots in paganism due to a syncretism, a religious syncretism that happened due to the colonialization and imperialization of Catholicism. Now, there's so much controversy about that due to the fact that some historians argue that the popular theory or the popular idea of these transitions is that there was a bloody war and a lot of imperialization happening, and even though it did happen, a lot of these communities willingly converted to Christianity in order so that they might enjoy certain benefits from their new vassals, i.e. the Roman Empire. And so fast forward a few years later, the Samhain was then replaced by I think it's called Missa Gaudiamus, which is the Latin for All Saints' Day, and then All Souls' Day in April was then in Latin called Omnium Sanctorum in Latin. So even though the Catholic Church took over, or rather appropriated the Celtic holiday of Samhain to a certain degree, fast forward a few years later to the early 1500s, or rather the Dark Ages, to the 1800s, it became a bit more ritualized, where a practice known as souling was invented, where the practice essentially similarly involved individuals going door to door to certain individuals and families, knocking on doors, asking for food. So how the souling worked is you knocked on the door, and a poor person would knock on the door and ask for food. And essentially the families would then give the poor community, the poor individuals, they would bake certain soul cakes, which were basically a low budget scone, essentially, to give to the poor, as so as not to break the bank, but also essentially create maximum efficiency throughout the evening. And in exchange for the soul cakes, the poor individuals or the impoverished individuals who knocked on the doors would then essentially pray for the souls of the families of the dearly departed. So the Catholics believe not just in the cosmological dualism of heaven and hell, they also include, as most people would know, purgatory, which is basically a liminal space between heaven and hell, where certain souls are yet to be decided of their fate, whether they go to heaven or hell. And essentially the prayers were basically encouraged by the individuals in England, especially in modern England, which is where the practice gained notoriety, so that the souls, the more prayers they essentially got, the more likely it would be that the dearly departed would then go to heaven, essentially, from purgatory. So as such, the soul cakes was given to beggars, and the beggars would then sing songs, also reciting hymns, similar to the traditions found in Celtic paganism, for the souls of the givers and their friends. There's a popular song, which is technically, I think, a Christmas carol that basically resembles the entire charade of the souling, which is, I think, one of the, I don't know if it's a de facto hymn that originates from the time being, but it goes along the lines of a soul cake, please good missus, a soul cake, 1 for Peter, 2 for Paul, and 3 for God that made us all. And so that's that's, for example, a hymn that would be sung. In addition, the rhymes that would be recited would be, I can't think of any examples now, but it would be essentially Christian-centered. It would be something that had cultural significance to the context at the day. In addition, which made the entire practice of souling quite lucrative, was that rich families could also go to Catholic priests and have their soul cakes blessed, for a fee, of course, and essentially then be distributed to the poor. And after learning of this, beggars decided to, utilize or capitalize on this entire phenomenon, and basically as well then ask for money instead of food. So that essentially happened, and that basically created, I say, the dawn for what we understand today as trick-or-treating, although most sources, however, are quite contradictory in that aspect, in the sense of that ritualized begging would be the main roots of where people would understand where the modern trick-or-treating comes from, although there are also other sources that equated with Guy Fawkes' Day, the guy who, burnt the British Parliament, wanted to blow up British Parliament before he was discovered and arrested, and became a prominent Renaissance figure for liberation. I don't know if you've watched the movie V for Vendetta before,
yes.
But yeah, that's basically where the entire Guy Fawkes narrative comes from. Or if you understand the movie, you will understand where Guy Fawkes comes from. But anyway, so again, after this ritualized begging, which occurred up until the 1800s, the Great Depression happened in the United States. And so this practice of ritualized begging not just ended in the 1800s, but went as far onwards as the early 1900s. And then the Great Depression happened in the United States, and essentially
it didn't work that year. So it didn't work that year, and the Depression happened.
Exactly. Yeah. So it didn't work that year because of the broad famine that happened, the collapse of Wall Street after the 1920s, and essentially America was then brought or dumped into what is known as the Great Depression. So a lot of food scarcity, famine, and there was also a book that was published by Ruth Edna Kelly, who was a librarian and author at the time, who is one of the earliest sources that we can find written down about Halloween. And so her book is called The Book of Halloween, which was published in 1919, so around the First World War. And so she wrote, and I've got the quote here, she basically wrote that in this book, the earliest literary reference to Halloween is that she referred bags filled with flour, sprinkle the passers-by, doorbells are rung, and mysterious raps sounded on doors. Things thrown into halls and knobs stolen. Halloween parties are the real survival of the ancient merrymakings. So this is the common connector to the ancient practices, to souling, and essentially taking a novel form of pranks that were committed by young people. So rotten fish being hung on doors and, knocking on doors and running away, the doorbell ringing, and silly pranks that would not really be considered vandalism, but would be significant enough of an inconvenience to annoy the victim quite severely. But as things progressed, unfortunately, a lot of these pranks became a bit more far-fetched and a bit more vandalistic. So these teenagers would, essentially spray paint or paint walls or damage buildings, burn cars. So it became very, very aggressive. And the unfortunate thing as well is that the war authorities tried to catch these individuals or these kids. They could not, because before they arrived on the scene, the perpetrators had already escaped. So it was very difficult to pinpoint them and pin them down. And so essentially the communities decided that they had enough of these pranks. It was all fun and games when it was unscrewing of doorknobs and it was a flaming dog poop on the doorstep of someone. But then it became a bit more violent and destructive. And so the communities sort of created groups and colloquiums to come together and decide how can we then, address this issue of vandalism. And so they decided to come up with the idea of parties. So a sort of a carnival type of esque thing, similar to what you see in movies today, where people would go to carnivals and shoot targets with certain guns or water guns or stuff like that, innocent things, and you would win prizes. Darts, competitive advantage, you take the hammer and slam something to see how much you can weigh or how much force you hit with, and then you can win a certain prize. And these were all supplicants or parties or entertainments filled with snacks provided by the community. So it was basically the community coming together to create a fun-filled evening filled with partying and snacks created and made by the community for the community's kids for one evening of enjoyment. So it's similar to matric dances, proms, and stuff like that, where you could dress up as a hoodlum, you can dress up as a mask, you can dress up in your favorite fantasy character, essentially. And
this
so
is so that they won't get the flaming poo on the doorstep.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Okay.
Or burn buildings down.
Sorry,
because...
stepping back there a little bit, what I kind of know a little bit about Halloween, wasn't there the reason for the whole dress up story was like back right in the beginning where the spirits were supposed to be able to cross over at that period. I think it was between 12 and 3, 12 in the evening and 3 in the morning, where the spirits were able to actually come into the real world and possess the living. The living would then dress up in certain outfits to confuse the spirits, so they wouldn't know. They would think it's almost like another soul or another spirit looking for somebody else, and the reason for the dress up was for confusion.
Yeah, absolutely. That's 100% correct. I completely forgot about that. That is absolutely 100% correct. So thank you for adding that. And that is also part of what you can add to the ancient pagans and what I referred to earlier as the Marie Louise and the mumming and guising that took part as the entire festivities. It was also in order to confuse the spirits and also serve as a deterrent. So yeah, that's definitely true. But later on, it became more of a popularized, commercialized thing more than anything else in the Great Depression specifically. But yes, in earlier years, absolutely. But
and then one other thing, Tristan. The main character around Halloween became Jack-o'-lantern.
Yes, we'll get to that later. Okay. We'll get to that later. I definitely want to focus on that as well, because that's a very, very interesting story.
And Lee, you want to take the mask off now? You must be sweating your balls off there.
No, I think
you trip on. Okay, go for it.
Stick it out, man. Fuck, it's hot.
Yeah, it is very hot. But yeah, so the parties became a supplicant for the vandalism, and it eventually ceased. And essentially, it was, I think, at the late 1900s, where the entire vandalism thing stopped, and the more commercialization went back to more innocent pranks. But then again, commercialization of the holiday followed, and people decided to essentially put up their own holiday decorations for Halloween so that the vandalisms or the vandalizers essentially would not, supplicate it or draft their own or put on their own. So that was also a sense of deterring the entire Halloween thing and make it a more fun-filled event, but also creating the community to deter the pranksters from ruining things. But anyway, so the unpreventable waging war against people was essentially characteristic of the whole Halloween endeavor in the early 1900s. And a fully fledged ritual, it only became, I think it was in 1927 in Alberta, Canada, when newspaper articles started noticing that these things happened and children started dressing up as hoodlums and gangsters and stuff like that, asking for treats. And that's where the trick-or-treating essentially comes from. So you ask for treats, and if you did not give treats, then essentially you would be tricked, so pranked, in essence. And so people decided, well, it's a small price to pay to give muffins or food or something to eat to the kids or the teenagers so that no serious harm would be done to the houses. So everybody prepared themselves accordingly, and it became a commercialized holiday. And after the sporadic emergence of this trick-or-treating in Alberta, Canada, it then became a widespread event throughout the world, and people started picking up on the tradition, and then kids started dressing up as hoodlums, as characters, and decided to make trick-or-treating a more ritualized practice during the evening. So, yeah, but then again, fast forwarding again, chronologically speaking, in the early 70s to 60s to 70s, Hollywood started taking advantage of this entire scene. So a lot of people might know that one of the first horror films that was made were, or on the topic of Halloween, was the movie named Halloween, with Mike Myers, the guy with a white mask and the knife, chasing people down before Scream became even a thing. So he was the character that basically gave Halloween a face. And that's where the idea of dressing as a horror character came from, and the commercialized idea of where the entire United States started capitalizing on this entire notion after the movie was made in 1978. And it was so popular that it basically resulted in an entire series of films, of several sequels being made until 2009. And so essentially, the earlier Halloween movie that was made in 1978 was then remade in 2018. And then during that same time, there was also what was known as the occult revival in the United States, where after the hippie era and the peace, make love, not war movement ended, there was a regression, or not a regression per se, but a renewed interest, what scholars term today as the occult revival or the occult renaissance in the United States, where a lot of people gained interest into divination practices or early pagan and I dare say occult practices, but not the stigmatized kind, but more the crystal ball readings, the tarot cards, the divination, the teacup readings. All of these ancient, what one would call esoteric practices, then gained popularity and became commercialized. And essentially, in addition to that, similarly, the evangelical movement started in the United States. The Word of Faith movement, with certain prosperity gospels, started and essentially tried taking a stand on this occult revival by creating what is known today as the Satanic Panic era, where people believed that Slash and certain bands and heavy metal was satanic, that certain records played backwards, had secret satanic messages. And people who grew up in the 60s, 70s, and 80s would know what I'm talking about. So the Christian church played a huge role in combating this occult revival, as they saw it as a threat to Christian evangelism and the theocratic identity of God, one nation under God, enshrined in the United States as a quote unquote Christian nation, traditionally speaking, which is a lot of what a lot of people believe it to be. Although, in essence, it really wasn't. The founding fathers weren't Christian, but nonetheless, America is rather known for creating the evangelical movement, and so the evangelical movement created this political uncertainty and this occult revival as a sort of a counter narrative to what they tried to achieve. And so America propagated and started with the Satanic Panic, with Geraldo Rivera's Satan's Underground, promoting myths of occult crime, which were later found to be fabricated myths based on Smith and Pads's Michelle Remembers, and similar texts that gained the rounds as part of the entire Satanic Panic endeavor. So Dungeons and Dragons were seen as gateways to demonic influence to children, fantasy games, and a lot of these things essentially boiled over to other territories. It even went so far as Australia, the United Kingdom, and I think even South Africa. South Africa had a very unique experience with the Satanic Panic, where the Occult Crimes Unit in South Africa under the leadership of Kobus Jonker opened in 1992 to investigate the allegations of ritual crime and occult murder. But later on, very few arrests were made, and so they started focusing on Muti murders, on African traditional religion, and etc., because of the fact that they believed that these alternative religions were an enemy to Christianity and to the spread of Christianity, and they perceived it as their duty to evangelize even further. So, essentially, thank you to evangelical Christians, today we still can't have nice things, such as Halloween, for example. But
I thought you were going to say like Muti.
But unfortunately, these things got stigmatized, and they've constantly received a bad reputation due to the misinformation being spread by religious fundamentalists in an attempt to promote their own ideologies. And you still get that today with religious charlatans like John Ramirez, who's a very famous charlatan and fraud, who would, for example, say that he was involved in Satanism and that Satan was his daddy and that he actually worshipped Satan. And these individuals would serve as poster boys for a revived sort of satanic panic where people would fear organized cults, basically creating an enmetous sort of approach towards white people and white privileged individuals in certain communities. So it had very much to do with race and privilege, and scholars who've written in extensively about this phenomenon in South Africa is Dr. Nikki Valkhoff from the University of the Witwatersrand, who, for example, connected the entire Satanic Panic, for example, to the apartheid loss of whiteness and the idea of that a lot of Western contexts had to deal with globalization and integration and diversity, because we all know that America, similar to South Africa, also had a segregation movement, which they just didn't give a name for it, and that's why they, in the eyes of the international community, got I'd say lighter off of it. But anyway, that's I digress. What I'm merely trying to say is that it was very much tied to privilege and religious privilege, the entire Satanic Panic narratives. And so you've got, as I said, individuals like John Ramirez who espouse certain fabricated narratives based on the occult. Another figure being Rebecca Brown, who wrote a popular book called He Came to Set the Captives Free. But later on, after the popularization of these narratives, Special Agent Kenneth V. Lanning from the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Special Victims Unit released a brilliant document in 1992 conducting an extensive investigation into the idea of occult crime and satanic crime, basically portraying it as just crime that was stigmatized with a certain agenda, but that 90% of the cases where demonic influences were concerned was fabricated myths, and that there were no evidence whatsoever for it. There's another example of Gavin Ivey in South Africa, who also wrote his doctoral thesis on the topic in, I think, 1996, who also added onto this narrative of the satanic panic being a fabricacious narrative based on alarmist and conspiritualist narratives propagated by no professional individual in a professional capacity, but rather by religious fundamentalists and basically what one would call today Karens. And in South Africa today, you've got similar individuals, fraudsters, who basically purport that the occult is alive and well in South Africa and basically focus around animal sacrifices. We spoke extensively about that in our previous interview. So I will not waste time on that. But yeah, so to add on that also to make it more interesting is the fact that now we get to society today in South Africa, where we find a bit of a polemical relationship with certain things that have horror themes or occult motifs to a certain degree, in the sense that we still are a developing country, and so intellectually we are very naive towards certain movements and certain ideas and ideologies. And as such, we have a strong religious and specifically Christian influence. I've never seen a Hindu or Muslim complain about Halloween, but quite frankly, Afrikaans Christians are quite on it when complaining about Halloween in the sense of where they are afraid of that their kids would then fall for demonic influence. And as such, which I don't know where they get it from, because of the fact that, as we've just explained, that Halloween has no satanic or even occult origins whatsoever, as people understand it today. Rather, it is an ancient cultural tradition in and of themselves, or in and of itself. And so Halloween and the occult simultaneously got a bad reputation based on correlation equals causation, which is the logical fallacy of what we call in Latin ad hoc ergo propter hoc, associating things together with one another just because they seemingly occur together, and putting them in the same basket just because they occur together, and therefore coming to the conclusion that they must be causative by, the same thing, or catalyzed by one of the same thing. So yeah, before I go to the story of Stingy Jack and what you referred to earlier, Lee, of Jack of the Lantern, are we still on the same page? Do you guys have any questions or any thoughts that you would like to share?
No, it's good.
No, it's
okay. Okay, cool. So the Jack-o'-lantern story is a fascinating tale, and it's particularly one of my favorite tales to tell people, because of the fact that it's so rich. If you understand culture and you understand religion, you'll see in this tale it resembles a lot of Irish Catholic identity, and it's quite indicative of, if you understand Irish Catholic theology and Irish culture, you to a certain degree understand why some of the themes in the story are quite opulent. I myself am quite privileged to have an Irish friend, whom I last night just quickly asked if I had everything correct in terms of my pronunciation, and he reassured me that my pronunciations were quite on par. So, but the one thing that that you should know about Irish in terms of the culture is that alcohol plays a big role, and you'll see that reflected in the story of Stingy Jack. So the Jack-o'-lantern story comes from a guy called Stingy Jack. It's a narrative that is basically an oral tradition, so nobody knows where the narrative comes from. Nobody knows really how old it is, but it's just something, a story, a sort of folklore tale told from generation to generation. And the tale tells of Stingy Jack, who was quite a prude. Nobody really liked him, who really had a reputation for being quite an asshole to the community. But he was also a vile drunkard, who was very much known for his indulgence in liquor and hanging out at the tavern quite frequently. So the elements of the story could indicate a certain cultural emergence of it being situated in the Dark Ages or Middle Ages. but there's no real way of knowing exactly, but essentially nonetheless. So the tale about Stingy Jack involves his reputation spreading throughout his town or his community, and the devil gaining a unique interest in Stingy Jack. And one evening, while Jack was spending his night at one of the taverns, drinking his sorrows away, making his way back home, the devil instructed one of his demons to basically go lie in the form of a corpse next to the road, where Jack would encounter the corpse on his way home. And on his way home, Jack was drunk as a skunk on his way back home, and he encountered this corpse next to the road. And this corpse had a very eerie sneer on its face, plastered across his face. And immediately Jack scared himself shitless when he saw this corpse. And simultaneously, he realized that, damn it, his time was up. And he suddenly had a confrontation with mortality and a sort of existential crisis. And so he realized that Satan had come to collect his soul, or the devil, rather, had come to collect his soul. And so he told this demon, like, listen, before we do anything, before I go to hell, I have one final request. And he asked Satan or the devil to come and drink a beer with him, to indulge him in one last drink before his eternal damnation. And
typical alcoholic, so
yeah, exactly.
Even one in the last drink, even if he's with the devil.
Yeah, exactly. So the devil thought, you know what, why not? And he went with him to the tavern, and they had the best of time. They drank, they made merry, and it was the best of fun for them both. Became best friends until it became time to conclude the evening, and Jack had to pay the tab. But then he realized, unfortunately, he was broke. And so he started thinking and appealing to Satan's ego, and told him, and he's like, listen, you're the devil. Why don't you help me pay the tab, like just quickly turn into a silver coin, and I can go and pay the bill. And Satan's like, sure, well, I'm the devil, why not? Of course I can do that. And so he turned himself into a silver coin, and as soon as he turned himself into a coin, Stingy Jack shoved the coin into his pocket. Unbeknownst to the poor devil, there was a crucifix in Jack's pocket, and so the devil was trapped. And Jack decided to leverage his captive by striking a deal with him, and told him, listen, if you left me alone for a decade, 10 years, then we can renegotiate after 10 years, and then I'll set you free. If you can grant my request, then sure, we'll have a bargain. And the devil really did not have much of a say or much of an argument, as he was stuck and captured, and so essentially he had to concede to Jack's whim, and Jack set him free. 10 years went by in the blink of an eye, and Satan returned to come and collect on his bargain with Jack. And Jack remembered, damn it, I had a deal with the devil. But I tricked the devil beforehand, and so the devil wasn't really happy with Jack. But nonetheless, Jack still pushed his luck, and he asked the devil and told him, okay, so since we're going to hell anyway, might I have one last request again? And the devil thought to give him the benefit of the doubt again, and he said, what is it this time? And Stingy Jack asked for an apple from the nearest tree to satiate his hunger for the long journey ahead. And so Satan conceded, and he's like, sure, we'll pick an apple next to the road with the nearest tree. And when they arrived at the tree, and the devil reached up to possess the tree and select a choice apple for Jack, Jack immediately grabbed a stick or something, or his knife in his pocket, and carved 3 crucifixes on the bark of the tree, which then trapped the devil again. The devil, realizing again he was fooled by Jack, wasn't very happy. And so Jack told him, like, listen, I'm not going to let you take me to hell. So if you promise me that you will not take me to hell, then I will set you free. Again, the devil had little choice but to concede, And essentially, Jack was left alone and he enjoyed his life unbothered in peace. Until one evening when Jack's mortality caught up to him, because there's only so long that your liver and your organs can survive after years and years of alcohol abuse and misuse. And so Stingy Jack decided that he would then traverse the realms, and he ended up in heaven. And St. Peter at the pearly gates met him and immediately scoffed at him and said, "No way. There is no way in hell that I'm allowing you into heaven. No way." And Jack, obviously trying to maintain his head high, tried not to be scoffed or tried not to be swayed by St. Peter's sentiments, and instead scoffed at him and walked away disappointedly, making his way downwards to hell. And there Satan was sitting on his throne, biding his time, and being unironically the only trustworthy individual or true to his word one between them two, decided to stick to his bargain with Jack and told him, "Listen, we had a bargain. Remember when you were still alive? Unfortunately, I can't allow you into hell either. So that's unfortunately the situation," he told Jack. But Jack, he then allowed him one final wish. And Jack essentially decided, well, that's awfully kind of the devil, being quite merciful and granting me one final wish. And he wondered, well, what essentially can I wish for? And so Jack conceded, well, there's not really much he can wish for. He can't wish for immortality or anything. But he instead wished for a light to guide his way, that he would then traverse the land of the living for all eternity, or at least until the judgment day, when the living and the dead would then, according to Christian eschatology, be judged and determine whether they are worthy for damnation or salvation. And so Satan granted Jack's request and gave him an ember from the pits of hell to carry around and serve as a light to guide him in the darkness. And Jack could obviously not keep this ember in his hands, as it was too flaming hot, and instead decided to grab a turnip and hollow out the turnip and then put the ember inside the turnip and use it as a makeshift lantern, which is where Jack o' the Lantern comes from. And then essentially this story became Irish folklore, and Jack traversed the realms of the living for all eternity. And whenever it's still said in the hills of Ireland, some people would say that if they still see strange lights in the evenings or hear strange noises, it might be Jack o' the Lantern. And so essentially they decided to do the exact same thing with Jack, but instead they took rutabagas and turnips and hollowed out pumpkins on their doorsteps and in the entryways of their houses. Also, putting embers or coals and candles inside to serve as a deterrent, not just for bad spirits, but also the spirit of Stingy Jack. So essentially, they then furthered the entire practice, and it became common practice until the Irish migrated to the United States. I can't exactly place the timeline, but there was a huge famine happening in Ireland at some stage, and they migrated to the United States as a result. And so while in the United States, they found a similar gourd-like species prevalent in the United States, which we understand as the pumpkin today. And they also not just carved out menacing faces on these rutabagas and turnip-ish species and pumpkin-like greens and vegetables, and putting the embers and stuff inside. They instead opted for the more useful pumpkin, which then had the same, if not more useful, appropriation for the embers and the candles being put inside of it. And that is essentially where Jack O' the Lantern comes from. And the entirety of the idea of Jack O' the Lantern is basically similar to Halloween, and how English as a language basically was constructed, or rather approached by the illiterate or the uneducated, in the sense of that you had the concept of certain phrases or certain letters being removed or omitted from the word is a better explanation for it. And so old, with the apostrophe, is essentially referential to old. And so people began to write as they spoke. And that is where Halloween, or All Hallows Eve, turned into Halloween. And, because of the fact that people who wrote letters spoke the way, or wrote the way they spoke. And so certain of the consonants were omitted. And Stingy Old Jack and Jack O' the Lantern, Jack of the Lantern, essentially, if we are to understand it in more, I'd say, literate English, the of essentially became O. And that is essentially where you can see a strong tie to the Irish culture. And that is essentially where Stingy Jack comes from. And they say he's still wandering the plains until the end of his days, or at least until Judgment Day.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic, because I know the pumpkins. I know your daughter was carving some pumpkins yesterday. Well, actually, you were carving pumpkins yesterday, Will, for your daughter's school. Now you're off, but you've gone mute. Mute it, man.
Yeah, we had to cancel our interview yesterday with the Kabbalist because I couldn't. She teaches Kabbalah. I couldn't finish because my daughter's at the American school, so it's big Halloween. It's huge, and they have a pumpkin competition. So yesterday I was carving this pumpkin, and I thought I was going to finish, and we had to cancel the interview because I hadn't finished the pumpkin, and the pumpkin was due today for the competition.
Sure. How did you do? How did it go? Did you take?
I don't know. As soon as I get off this interview, I'm going to ask her mother what happened. But
yeah, no, it's largely because of the United States that we get to celebrate Halloween, because obviously capitalism and the Halloween economy boomed in the United States, and a lot of businesses basically used advantage or took advantage of this new formed economic opportunity after the Great Depression, especially.
Yeah, I remember when I was living in the UK for some time. This is back in the 90s, 1996 around that. It wasn't huge, but there were places that used to celebrate Halloween. And then I think it was either last year or the year before, we were out in Greece, and they also celebrate Halloween. It was actually so nice. And it's just,
wow.
All it was is it was just seemed like such a friendly vibe. It was like Christmas. You know what I mean? Where everybody was having fun, and people were dressed up, and the shops had Halloween stuff in it, and it was
kids love it. Kids just love that.
Yeah,
it's dude, adults love it.
It's amazing, and it's quite unfortunate that people have created this big stigmatization, because it just takes the fun out of the entire evening. Creating these alarmist narratives, scaring kids with ideas of the devil and Satan. It's I mean, the only incorporation of the devil essentially is the idea of Jack O' the Lantern, and it makes sense as to why it was incorporated with Halloween, because it has close ties to Samhain in the Irish calendar, which is basically where these cultural syncretisms and these traditions migrated and combined together to create all of the iconographies and the ideas that we know as Halloween today, which give the traces and showcase the traces of all of the cultures and the histories that it comes from throughout all of the years.
Well, I mean, the only thing I learned from that jack-o'-lantern story was that don't trust an addict, because they're so manipulative that they'll even trick the devil.
Absolutely. 100%.
No, cool. Tristan, what I thought, okay, look, I know you need to get going soon.
No, I've still got time.
That's cool. I think what we're going to do is we're going to leave the witchcraft for a total separate session.
Cool.
Because I think we've got enough there to have a good Halloween podcast.
Yeah, and you just want to get out of that mask.
Yeah, fuck.
Yeah.
But Tristan, thanks again, man. Much appreciated again for
Yeah,
your time.
Tristan, thanks,
I hope
man.
you have a
Oh,
good
Ian,
book
well,
reading tonight.
this was such a fun conversation, and I'm so, so happy and so honored that you guys invited me for a second time. And I hope that I at least gave you value for your time.
No, of course, and
Yeah,
we'll
likewise. Well,
be
thanks so
inviting
much
you
for
back. You're our
being
friendly
on.
Right.
neighborhood Satanist.
It's a pleasure. Thank you
Yeah.
so much, guys.
Cool. Tristan, have a good one, man.
Yeah,
You too,
man.
guys.
Tristan, have a good one, man.
Cheers, man.
Cheers, dude. Happy Halloween.
Cheers.
Happy Halloween.
You too.
Cool, man.
Sweet, buddy.
Tristan's very sharp, man. He knows his shit, eh?
Yeah, geez, he went on like.
Yes, yes. Can you imagine trying to argue with that oak? He'll never. That oak knows too much.
Yeah.
He's very, very good at it. But
Yeah, geez, that's really good.
look. So I think we're gonna end it off there tonight for the guys. Oh, before we go, like we used to have Halloween parties, and myself and Tanya we used to host. And I remember this one year. This is going back about 5 years ago. We had about 50 people. Everybody dressed up. Yeah, okay, a lot of drinking and hangover the next day, and kind of people lying on the floor. You know, like when you see in the movies, you walk around.
Yeah, I've heard
And they're actually like sleeping on the couch and
plenty of those parties. Yeah.
Yes, dude. So, and then I remember I dressed up like Freddy Krueger. So I'd made my whole outfit myself. The hat, the striped shirt, the claws,
Nice,
and
dude.
the kids in the neighborhood used to come trick or treat. So I would hide in the bush. This one, yeah, the specific, yeah, I hid in the bush because I knew they were coming. And this group of kids, probably with the parents, they crossed the thing to come to our thing, and I jumped out the bush, dude. These oaks fucking shat themselves. They cook. One kid actually sprained an ankle.
You should have dressed up as a hijacker or a mugger. You would have been it would have been even more scary.
But awesome, guys, man. Yeah, this is a Halloween edition. This is not part of our normal podcasts. We'll be back to normal from next week. But yeah, I hope you enjoy that. And yeah, we'll chat to you. We'll chat to you soon.
Yeah.
Happy Halloween, guys. Have a good one.
Cheers, guys.